I would never cheat on my C6R5 wife Kokomi, but if I had a nickel for every pure HP scaling Hydro character that doesn't build crit that I liked, I'd have 2 nickels. I swear guys, I definitely don't have a type. I'm sure many of you already know Nilou is a character that turns Bloom, which is usually an intermediary reaction towards Hyper Bloom or Burgeon, into a legitimate playstyle. And since her initial release in patch 3.1, she's only gotten better over time as more Hydro and Dendro characters joined the Genshin cast and better build options were released. Y'all know the drill by now, this Nilou build guide will cover everything you need to know about Nilou's playstyle, builds, and teams right before we head into Notlin. So without further ado, let's get this guide rolling. Most of the difficulties players have with Nilou come with her team building, but her personal playstyle is pretty simple. As long as your team has only Dendro and Hydro characters, everything revolves around her first Ascension talent, which turns regular Dendro cores into bountiful cores that have larger AoEs and explode much faster than normal once Nilou finishes unleashing her elemental skill. Additionally, bountiful cores created by any teammate will deal increased damage based on Nilou's HP that exceeds 30,000, capping out at 74,444 HP, which is an oddly specific number, but that's just how the math works out. So you always want to level Nilou to 90 to get as close as possible to maxing out this passive, and also because the Bloom damage calculation also has a level multiplier as well. Now as for Nilou's combat skills, the only thing that matters for her is her elemental skill. Activating her skill once will put her in the pirouette state, which allows her to normal attack or elemental skill up to 3 times for Hydro damage. If you skill 3 times in the pirouette state, Nilou will create a Hydro ring around her that applies Hydro to nearby enemies every 2 seconds. If you normal attack 3 times in the pirouette state, Nilou will gain Hydro Infusion for 8 more seconds, and these Hydro infused attacks count as elemental skill damage instead of normal attack damage. Whether you want to play the off-field playstyle of the Hydro Ring or the on-field playstyle of the Hydro Infusion, technically only the final hit of her elemental skill combo matters. So you can do something like skill, normal attack twice, and then skill again at the very end to still get the Hydro Ring for proper off-field support. However, that nuance doesn't really matter unless you're looking to hyper-optimize your gameplay where you can skill, normal attack twice, burst, then finish your skill to minimize Nilou's field time while funneling energy for Nilou's next elemental burst. If you're a casual player, all you need to know is that Nilou can play on-field by normal attacking after using her skill, or off-field by spamming her elemental skill 4 times before switching out. Also, because Bloom damage isn't affected by any of Nilou's upgradable talents, you can be pretty conservative when it comes to leveling her talents and can even leave everything at level 1 if you're super stingy. If you do want to invest in Nilou's talents because she's a queen and deserves every bit of your Mora, then focus on her skill first, then her burst, and leave her normal attacks at level 1. Thanks to the introduction of a certain artifact set tailored towards Deha but failed to actually become Deha's best in slot because of her energy problems, we now have a new optimal build for Nilou since her first banner. That optimal build is the 2-set Tenacity of the Millelith with the 2-set Vourukasha's Glow. Because 74,444 max HP is a very large goal for Nilou's extra Bloom damage passive, even with an HP % weapon, running double HP 2-set bonuses tends to be the best way to build Nilou because it effectively buffs the entire team's damage thanks to her A4 talent. Additionally, having double 2-sets allow you to mix and match pieces a little better to squeeze out some more optimized substats, which include HP %, EM, energy recharge, and flat HP in that order of priority. While the 4-set Vourukasha's Glow is a viable option for an on-field Nilou, her personal damage is somewhat negligible until you get her C6, which grants a ton of crit value. Thus, if you cannot build the 2-set Tenacity with the 2-set Vourukasha's, it is recommended to temporarily replace one of the HP % 2-sets with an EM set bonus like the 2-set Wanderer's Troop, 2-set Gilded Dreams, or 2-set Flower of Paradise Lost. Main stats include triple HP % in the Sands, Goblet, and Circlet, while the substat priority, which I mentioned less than a minute ago, is back up on the screen if you need a refresher. And before we move on to weapons, some very vague stat benchmarks you can aim towards are 55k HP without an HP main stat sword, or 71k HP with a main stat HP % sword, not including the extra HP that you get from the Hydro Resonance. Through substats, aim towards at least 100 EM and about 130 to 140% energy recharge to burst every other rotation. If you're looking for precise numbers, as long as you have 7,648 HP or higher, the Hydro Resonance will allow you to cap out Nilou's A4 passive, which is yet another oddly specific number, but that's just how the math works out. I really want you to remember that these numbers are just benchmarks to shoot for, so just because you're a little short of these numbers doesn't mean your Nilou is trash. They're just here to give you a clear goal to shoot for, and it's totally fine to call your Nilou build done if she's pretty close but not exactly at the benchmark. Also, these numbers assume you're running the optimal 2-set Tenacity with the 2-set Vourukashas, so numbers may vary if you're running 2 different set bonuses. And just like Nilou's artifacts, Nilou's weapons also got a slight shakeup thanks to a very niche 4-star sword that has Nilou as one of the only characters it's viable on. But before that, it should be no surprise that Key of Khaj Nisut is Nilou's best option by a long shot. This weapon's huge HP boost to Nilou and a huge EM boost to the team makes this weapon extremely valued to pull over her C1. While this weapon is much more recommended than C1 Nilou, that doesn't mean you need to get it if you're trying to save for other characters in the near future. In fact, Nilou is one of the most free-to-play friendly characters since she's completely functional at C0 with a 4-star weapon, since she's mainly a bloom enabler rather than a DPS that needs as much personal damage as possible with a 5-star weapon. Her second best option is the 4-star sword, the Dockhand's assistant, which is the only other HP % sword in the game currently. However, many players will not have this sword since it is a limited banner 4-star weapon, so in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th slots we turn to Elemental Mastery swords. Those swords are Zephos' Moonlight, Iron Sting, and Toukabou Shigure in that order of tiering respectively. Zephos' Moonlight has the most useful passive that grants energy recharge to the team based on Nilou's EM, so getting around 300 EM through weapon main stat and substat rolls will essentially give Nilou's teammates an extra ER substat. Iron Sting and Toukabou Shigure don't have supportive passives, but the main upside of these two weapons are that they're free-to-play options that provide sizable EM main stats. And last but not least, we do have to mention Favonia's Sword and Sacrificial Sword, which are both very viable options that can be better than any non-HP main stat sword when used in the right situation. Fav Sword's passive can help reduce the energy requirements of teammates with the clear energy particles that it generates, but does require you to build some crit rate substats on Nilou for consistency with proccing the passive. Sacrificial Sword allows Nilou to trigger both her off-field Hydro Ring and her on-field Hydro Infusion thanks to the skill cooldown reset passive, which is especially useful if you plan to spend on-field time with Nilou. And of course, both weapons provide a hefty amount of energy recharge, so if you just build a little bit more through substats, you can burst every rotation instead of every other rotation by hitting 180 to 200% total energy recharge. In order to team build with Nilou, you should first understand the basics of Bloom as a reaction. The first nuance with Bloom is something that most players already know, and that's what we call reaction ownership. So let's say I create a Dendro core with a character that doesn't have much EM. The damage is pretty low. Now let's say I bring in my Kaveh, who pretty much builds full EM to create a Dendro core. His Dendro core does way more damage in comparison. Basically, like any other reaction in this game, the Bloom reaction only calculates its damage based on the EM of the character that created the Dendro core. This is great in theory because we can build full EM on a character and have them trigger all the Bloom reactions for maximum damage, and it's why in Burgeon or Hyper Bloom teams, your Pyro or Electro character is the one with the full EM build. However, for Nilou Bloom teams, that's not how actual gameplay works. No matter how much you calculate on a sheet or simulate team rotations, that perfect situation is hard to come by. In most Nilou teams, reaction ownership is hard to control by yourself, and your best bet is to just have some EM on every single team member, so that no matter who creates the Dendro core with a little bit of EM and Nilou's talent that enhances the Bloom damage multiplier, your Bloom damage will still be great across the board regardless of who created the Dendro core. This is why even with Nilou who builds full HP, we still want to set that 100 EM benchmark to shoot for in your artifacts, and the same can go for some of your healers like Barbara, Kokomi, Yaoyao, etc., who mainly build HP and healing bonus but should try to focus EM in substats when paired with Nilou. Another basic of Bloom reactions is the fact that Hydro is considered a weak element in the Hydro and Dendro combination. If you've ever noticed that melting with Cryo onto Pyro will still leave some Pyro on the enemy, but reversing the reaction to have Pyro benefit from the melt multiplier leaves no trace of Cryo left on the enemy. The same philosophy applies with Bloom, where applying Hydro onto an enemy with Dendro still leaves some of the Dendro behind, while applying Dendro onto Hydro completely consumes the Hydro. This means that you can effectively create more Bloom reactions if you're able to consistently have the Dendro aura linger on enemies, while Hydro is applied at a moderate enough rate to not overtake that Dendro aura. While not every team can perfectly keep this balance at all times, we try our best to keep this balance as often as possible by running 2 Dendro characters with Nilou in many of our teams, since most Dendro characters have too slow of a Dendro application rate by themselves. This team archetype is called the Double Hydro Double Dendro setup and is the standard archetype that most players will opt for. To start out, I find that it's easiest to pick your second Hydro character first. If you don't have Yaoyao or Baiju on your account, then this second character has to be Barbara, Kokomi, or Sijuin because you need a healer to recover any of the self-damage that your Bloom reactions deal to your team. If you do have a Dendro healer, then the door opens up to many more Hydro options like Xingqiu, Yelan, and Furina for off-field Hydro application, or Child, Ayato, and Millelith for on-field Hydro application. To round the team out, the characters that are viable in a double Hydro double Dendro Nilou team include Dendro MC, Kole, Yaoyao, Baiju, Kave, Kirara, Alhaitham, and Nahida. Remember that you must pick at least one of Yaoyao or Baiju if your Hydro characters are not healers. Otherwise, you can mix and match between Dendro MC and Kole for strictly off-field Dendro application, and Kave, Kirara, or Alhaitham for strictly on-field Dendro application. Nahida is the sole outlier here because she can either take the backseat and stay off-field with strong Dendro application on her elemental skill, or be the driver of the team because her catalyst attacks are great for extra Dendro application when on-field. This, of course, makes her the ideal teammate for Nilou with unrivaled Dendro application and role flexibility that no other character provides at the moment. And those benefits are precisely why Nahida also excels in a second Nilou archetype that utilizes 3 Hydro characters with 1 solo Dendro character. The reason this archetype exists is because it allows us to use a high EM Dendro character to create a larger portion of the Dendro cores and deal more damage on a per Dendro core basis. However, the only caveat with this team is that in order to really be effective, that single Dendro character that you pick needs a consistent and fast rate of Dendro application. The only 2 characters that fit this mold right now are Nahida and Alhaitham. As for the Hydro characters to support them, you need 1 healer and 1 off-field Hydro applicator. The healer is of course Sijuin, Kokomi, or Barbara, while the off-field Hydro applicator is either Xingqiu, Yelan, or Furina. You'll notice that this team is a lot more restrictive than the double Hydro double Dendro archetype, but that's because its damage ceiling can be a lot higher, especially in single target scenarios where the other archetype struggles. And last but not least, we have a special case team that revolves around the trio of Nilou, Candace, and Yaoyao. This is a double Hydro double Dendro team that revolves around Yaoyao running around with her elemental burst for Dendro application while weaving in normal attacks for Hydro application thanks to Candace's ability to grant the team Hydro infusion. The final slot is usually a Dendro applicator between Dendro MC, Kole, or Nahida because their off-field application will cover for the downtime on Yaoyao's burst. Although the team is very specific in units, this team can be built entirely out of 4-star characters aside from Nilou herself, which makes it 100% worth mentioning in this video. Plus, it's a unique combination that makes use of Candace, who in my opinion is a very underutilized character, so it's nice to be able to mention her name in one of my guides. But with that, hopefully you guys enjoyed this updated Nilou guide, and most importantly, I hope this guide was helpful for building the perfect Nilou for your account. Other than that, it's the same as always. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.